Let's start with a question that doesn't have an easy answer. What's the most dangerous thing you can do with a medical degree? Most people would say practicing in a war zone, or treating infectious diseases, or maybe volunteering in a place with no electricity and a single rusty scalpel. But Sam Dubal would probably disagree. See, Sam had all those skills. He'd worked in Haiti after the earthquake, treating crushed limbs and infected wounds under tarps. He'd cared for refugees navigating the brutal asylum system. He'd done the on-the-ground, hands-in-the-dirt medicine that most doctors only talk about over coffee. But he thought the most dangerous thing you could do, the thing that actually scared him, was to sit in a conference room in San Francisco and write policy papers without ever listening to the people those policies would hit. That was his gift, or maybe his curse. He couldn't stop listening. Let's paint a picture of this guy, because if you don't know who he was, you can't understand why his disappearance hit so many people so hard. Sam was born in 1985, grew up in the Bay Area. His parents were immigrants from India. They came with the usual immigrant story: work hard, sacrifice, make sure your kids get the opportunities you didn't. And Sam took that and ran with it, but not in the straight line they might have imagined. He went to UC Berkeley, then medical school at the University of Washington. On paper, he was checking all the boxes. But even then, his professors noticed something. He wasn't just memorizing anatomy. He was asking why some patients got better care than others. He was questioning why poverty made people sick. He was the guy who'd stay after class to argue about structural violence. This idea that the real cause of illness isn't a virus, it's the systems that make certain people vulnerable to that virus. One of his mentors described him as having a moral urgency, not the annoying kind, the kind that makes you want to be better. So he added a PhD in anthropology to his medical training, because he realized that to heal people you have to understand their world, their history, their relationship to the land, their language, their jokes, their silences. This is unusual. Most doctors don't do that. They learn the science. They learn the protocol. They don't spend years living in a fishing village, learning to gut a fish with a rusty knife, learning to sit in the shade and listen to elders argue about who owns which coconut tree. But Sam did, and that's what brought him, eventually, to a place called Cabo Delgado. Have you ever seen pictures of northern Mozambique? The coastline stretches for miles: white sand, turquoise water, coral reefs that look like underwater cities. The Quirimbas archipelago, 32 coral islands strung along the coast, is the kind of place travel magazines run spreads about. You see a photo and you think, I need to go there. I need to see this before it's gone. And that's exactly what a lot of people thought in the 2000s. In 2002, the Mozambican government, with a whole lot of help from the World Wildlife Fund, created the Quirimbas National Park. It was a conservation dream. 6,000 square miles of protected land and sea, elephants, lions, wild dogs, sea turtles, dugongs. A biodiversity hotspot that, if managed right, could become a model for sustainable development. Sounds beautiful, right? Sounds like the kind of story we all want to hear, people coming together to save a piece of the planet. But here's the thing about creating a park. When you draw a big green circle on a map and say, this land is now protected, someone was already living there. For centuries, the Makonde and Mwani people had lived along that coast. They farmed cassava and millet. They fished with hand-carved canoes. They knew every reef, every tide, every fish migration pattern. Their lives were woven into that landscape like thread into cloth. Then the park came. Now I want to be careful here, because I'm not saying conservation is bad. Protecting wildlife and ecosystems is vital. We're losing species at a terrifying rate, but the way it was done, the way it's often done, is to treat the land as empty, as a wilderness waiting to be restored, ignoring the people who are already there. In the Quirimbas, that meant restrictions. You couldn't fish in certain areas anymore. You couldn't farm in certain zones. Villages that had been there for generations were told to move, not with a gun to their head but with the kind of bureaucratic pressure that's just as effective. No permits, no access to resources. Slowly, quietly, people were pushed aside. And in their place came eco-lodges, expensive ones, the kind where tourists pay $1,000 a night to sleep in a tent with a bamboo floor and a private plunge pool. I'm not making this up. There's a lodge called Vamazi Island. It's stunning. Celebrities have stayed there. It's held up as a model of high-end, low-impact tourism. But the island had communities on it. Those communities were relocated. The lodge brought in jobs, sure. But it also brought in a different power structure, a foreign one. Sam saw this. He saw it with the eyes of a doctor asking who was getting sick because of it. And he saw it with the eyes of an anthropologist asking who had the power to tell the story. By 2017, Sam had spent years going back and forth to Cabo Delgado. He spoke Portuguese fluently. He was learning local languages. He had friends in villages with names like Mucojo, Quaitrajo, Macomia. People trusted him. They'd invite him to weddings, to funerals, to sit with them while they mended their nets. His research was building into something significant. He was documenting the everyday reality of conservation from the perspective of the people who lived inside the park. Not as victims, but as people navigating a new world, one where their fishing grounds were suddenly off-limits, where their fields were now part of a buffer zone, where foreign conservationists came through with clipboards and never really listened. He wrote about the irony. The same NGOs that were protecting the elephants were often ignoring the people whose land the elephants walked on. He wasn't saying conservation should stop. He was saying it needed to be done with communities, not to them. His work was getting attention. He presented at academic conferences. He was writing for journals. He was becoming the go-to person for understanding the human side of the park. But here's where it gets complicated. There was money in that park. Big money. Tourism dollars. International NGO funding. And underneath it all something much, much bigger. Natural gas. In 2010, an American company called Anadarko discovered massive natural gas deposits off the coast of Cabo Delgado. We're talking trillions of cubic feet, enough to make Mozambique one of the world's largest gas exporters. The government saw it as their ticket out of poverty. Foreign companies saw it as a once-in-a-generation investment. A consortium led by Total Energies, the French oil giant, started planning a massive liquefied natural gas facility on the Afungi Peninsula, right at the edge of the park. Now, think about that for a second. A national park, a massive gas project, a population of farmers and fishermen who were already being squeezed by conservation restrictions, and an insurgency starting to simmer in the background. This wasn't just a conservation story anymore. It was a geopolitical pressure cooker. Sam knew it. His research was shifting. He was documenting not just the park, but the way the gas project was reshaping everything: land rights, security, the balance of power between the government and local communities. He was talking to people who'd been displaced for the gas project. He was hearing stories of harassment by private security guards. He was building a picture of a region where poor people were being pushed aside for two things: wildlife and fuel. That's a dangerous picture to be painting. In October 2017, the first attacks happened. A shadowy group calling themselves Al-Shabaab, not to be confused with the Somali group of the same name, started attacking police stations and government buildings in Cabo Delgado. They burned villages. They beheaded people. They flew black flags. Who were they? To this day, it's murky. Some say they were a local extremist group, fueled by grievances over inequality and corruption. Others say they were a front for regional jihadi networks. What's clear is that they exploited the anger people felt. Anger at the government. Anger at the foreign companies. Anger at being pushed off their land while outsiders got rich. The government responded with force. They sent in the army. They hired private military contractors. They cracked down hard. And in that crackdown, a lot of innocent people got caught. This is the context Sam was working in when he returned to Mozambique in early 2019. His family and friends back in California were worried. They read the headlines about beheadings, about villages being torched. They asked him, "Isn't it too dangerous? Shouldn't you come home?" Sam's response, from what I've read, was typical of him. He acknowledged the danger, but he also felt a deep responsibility to the people he'd been working with. They were living through this. They were the ones facing violence, displacement, hunger. How could he leave when they couldn't? He was also finishing his dissertation. He needed to wrap up interviews. He had a timeline. He was planning to come back to the US in May, start his faculty position at UXF, turn his research into a book. He didn't know that May would be his last month. Let's walk through the last days. On May 2, 2019, Sam posted a photo on Facebook. It shows him standing next to a Jeep with a local friend. He's wearing a green shirt, a cap, a big smile. The caption is a bit academic, talking about the research he's doing on the humanitarian and security situation in Cabo Delgado. But there's an optimism there, a sense of purpose. The next morning, May 3, Sam and a colleague, a Mozambican researcher named Ibrahimo, drove from the coastal city of Pemba up to a village called Mukojo. It's about 3 hours north on a dirt road that winds through cashew forests and past small trading posts. Mukojo was a place Sam had visited before. He had contacts there, people who trusted him. They spent the day in Mukojo, meeting with community members, asking questions, taking notes. The details of those meetings, what exactly was said, who they talked to, have never been fully made public. What we know is that later that afternoon, they got in their white Toyota Hilux and started driving back toward Pemba. They never arrived. When they didn't show up, colleagues in Pemba started calling. No answer. The phones rang and rang, then went to voicemail. They called again and again. Nothing. A search was organized, but it wasn't easy. This wasn't a place with a well-equipped police force. The government's presence was thin. The army was focused on fighting insurgents. The roads were dangerous. For days, there was just silence. News trickled back to California. Sam's parents, his sister, his friends, they went through what no family should ever go through. The frantic calls to the State Department, the desperate pleas on social media, the waiting. For 5 months they waited. During that time, rumors flew. Some said Sam and Ibrahimo had been kidnapped by insurgents. Others said they'd been caught in a government ambush. Others whispered that Sam's research had made him a target, not of the militants, but of those who wanted his findings to disappear. Sam's family clung to hope. They raised money. They hired private investigators. They lobbied members of Congress. They did everything they could think of. Then in October 2019, the news came. A body had been found in a shallow grave not far from the road between Mukojo and Pemba. The remains were identified as Sam Dubal. He was 33 years old. The official story was that Sam and Ibrahimo were killed by insurgents. A tragic, senseless death in a conflict zone. Case closed. Except it wasn't. Let me ask you something. If a young American doctor, a citizen, is killed in a foreign country while doing research, what do you expect to happen next? An investigation, right? A thorough one. The U.S. government pressing for answers. A transparent process, justice. That's not what happened. From the start, the investigation was a mess. Mozambican authorities never released a detailed report. The crime scene, the shallow grave, wasn't properly processed. Witnesses weren't interviewed in a systematic way. The individuals responsible were never identified, let alone brought to trial. Sam's family was left in the dark. They received conflicting information. Some officials said the killers were insurgents. Others hinted it might have been a robbery gone wrong. No one could give them a clear, consistent account. And then there was the question of the timeline. Sam and Ibrahimo disappeared in early May. Their bodies weren't found until October. What happened in those 5 months? Who knew about the grave? Why wasn't it discovered sooner? These questions festered. Sam's family started digging. They hired their own investigators. They pored over Sam's emails, his field notes, his contacts. They talked to journalists who had covered the conflict. Slowly, a more complicated picture emerged. One of the things they discovered was Sam's relationship with a man named Nick Asquith. Asquith was a British businessman who ran a safari lodge inside the Quirimbas National Park. He was the kind of figure Sam was critiquing in his research, an outsider profiting from conservation while local communities were pushed aside. In the days after Sam's disappearance, Asquith inserted himself into the search efforts. He communicated with Sam's family. He claimed to be helping, but some people who knew Sam were suspicious. Was Asquith helping, or was he trying to control the narrative? I'm not saying Asquith had anything to do with Sam's death. There's no evidence of that, but it's worth noting that Sam's research was critical of people like Asquith. And in a region where power and money flow through a small network of influential foreigners, a voice like Sam's was a threat. Then there was the gas. The Total Energies project was the biggest thing happening in Cabo Delgado. Billions of dollars, thousands of workers, a massive security apparatus. The project was so important to the Mozambican government that they were willing to look the other way when abuses happened. Sam had been documenting those abuses. He talked to people who'd been displaced from the Afungi Peninsula to make way for the gas plant. He'd heard stories of forced evictions, of inadequate compensation, of security forces intimidating villagers. He was building a file that, if made public, would have been deeply embarrassing to the government and to Total. So here's the uncomfortable question. In a place where a foreign researcher is documenting abuses that powerful people want hidden, what happens when that researcher disappears? The answer, often, is nothing, because no one wants to look too closely. Sam's family refused to let the story die. In 2020, they filed a lawsuit against the U.S. government. They sued under the Freedom of Information Act, demanding that the State Department, the FBI, and other agencies release all documents related to Sam's case. They wanted to know what the U.S. government knew, what they did, and when they did it. The lawsuit dragged on for years. The government fought it, citing national security, ongoing investigations, all the usual bureaucratic stall tactics. But the family persisted. They hired lawyers. They held press conferences. They kept Sam's name in the news. When documents finally started trickling out, they were heavily redacted. Pages and pages of black ink. But even with the redactions, a picture emerged. The U.S. Embassy in Mozambique knew Sam was taking risks. They'd been in contact with him. They'd warned him about the security situation. But did they do enough to protect him? Did they follow up aggressively enough when he went missing? The documents suggest, maybe not. One document revealed that the embassy had information about Sam's whereabouts in the days after his disappearance that they didn't share with his family. Another showed that the FBI had opened an investigation, but it went nowhere. Sam's family wasn't satisfied. They pushed for more. They asked for an independent review. They demanded accountability. In 2023, the State Department finally issued a statement expressing condolences and acknowledging that Sam's case remained a priority. But no one was charged. No one was held accountable. So what do we take from this? I don't want to end this story with easy conclusions because there aren't any. Sam's death was a tragedy. But it was also a symptom of a world where conservation, extraction, and conflict collide and the people in the middle get crushed. Think about what Sam was trying to do. He was trying to hold up a mirror, to say, look, this park you're so proud of. It came at a cost. This gas project that's supposed to lift the country out of poverty. Some people paid that price with their homes, their livelihoods, their lives. He was asking the kind of questions that make people uncomfortable. And when you make powerful people uncomfortable, there are consequences. I'm not saying Sam was murdered because of his research. I don't know that. No one does. What I'm saying is that his research put him in the crosshairs. Not literally, maybe, but figuratively. It made him a person of interest. It made him someone that some people would rather not have around. And in a place like Cabo Delgado, where the state is weak, where violence is common, where insurgents and soldiers and private security guards all operate with impunity, being a person of interest can get you killed. Sam's family has turned their grief into purpose. They established the Sam Dubal Memorial Fund, supporting research and advocacy at the intersection of human rights, health, and the environment. They've worked with journalists to keep the story alive. They've spoken out about the need for accountability in conservation and extractive industries. His dissertation was published posthumously. If you read it, and I encourage you to look it up, you'll find a portrait of a man who cared deeply about justice. Not abstract justice, but the small, everyday kind. The justice of a fisherman being able to feed his family. The justice of a farmer not being pushed off his land for the sake of an elephant. The justice of a community having a say in its own future. In the final pages, Sam wrote about the people of Cabo Delgado. He said his hope was that his work might, in some small way, help them live and die with dignity. He didn't know he would die there. He didn't know his own dignity would be stripped away by violence and silence, but his words remain. His questions remain, and as long as people ask them, he's not really gone. As of today, the conflict in Cabo Delgado continues. The insurgency hasn't been defeated. The gas project has faced repeated delays and attacks. Thousands of people have been killed, hundreds of thousands displaced. The park is still there, still protected, but the communities inside it are struggling. Food is scarce. Schools are closed. Fear is a constant companion. Total Energies, after suspending operations for years because of security concerns, has announced plans to restart the gas project. They say they've implemented new security measures. They say they're committed to protecting human rights. Critics say it's the same story all over again, profits first, people second. Sam's family continues to seek answers. They've never stopped. They've met with government officials, with NGO leaders, with anyone who might help them understand what really happened to their son, their brother. In 2024, a new round of FOIA documents was released, still heavily redacted, still frustratingly incomplete. But it showed that the U.S. government had more information than they'd previously acknowledged. It showed that the FBI had identified persons of interest. It showed that the investigation at some level was more active than the family had been told. But no arrests, no charges, no closure, so I'll leave you with this. Sam Dubal was a doctor, an anthropologist, a son, a brother, a friend. He went to a beautiful, broken place to try to understand how the world works and how it might work better. He listened when others didn't. He asked questions when others stayed silent. And now he's gone. The official story says he was killed by insurgents. That might be true. It might be the whole truth. But it might not. What we know for sure is that his death was convenient for a lot of people. Convenient for those who didn't want the park's dark side exposed. Convenient for those who didn't want scrutiny on the gas project. Convenient for those who prefer their conservation stories simple, their development stories optimistic, their uncomfortable questions buried. Sam was buried in a shallow grave, but the questions he raised, they won't stay buried. They can't. Because if we stop asking them, we stop learning. We stop holding power accountable. We stop believing that one person, armed with nothing but curiosity and compassion, can make a difference. Sam believed that. He lived that. And in the end, maybe that's his real legacy. Not the answers he found, but the questions he left behind. What are we willing to risk to make the world more just? And who will ask the questions when he's gone? Thanks for listening. If you want to learn more, look up Sam's writing. Read his dissertation. Follow the work his family is doing. Keep his story alive, because a story that's remembered is a story that still has power. Take care of each other, and never stop asking,